if you are someone who doesn't believe in that and who's really more interested in regime survival, then it's actually good if these people leave, because these people might have caused you trouble. And if you can't offer them jobs, and they're not able to be absorbed into the economy, you don't want 150,000 educated people who are frustrated and disillusioned, who may organize, who may dissent, and so it really gets to the issue of rulership, in my view. And the other thing, on this issue of, pride, and the Iranian authorities are selective, on issues of pride. For example, they talk about, well, we are a great historical civilization, therefore we have a great scientific base, therefore we ought to be able to enrich uranium, because other countries in the world that have scientific bases enrich uranium. One can make that argument, certainly. But where is the pride when Iranians have trouble going anywhere because their passport is not accepted, anywhere? Where is the pride when Iranians are viewed the way they are viewed, around the world? Where is the pride in a family, in a father that has to hold 3 jobs just to make ends meet? So the government will go overboard on, thumping their chest about Iran's historical civilizational roots and saying, therefore, we should be a great power and we should be. But China did not become a great power when it detonated a nuclear device. China became a great power when it started getting its economy in order, when it started moving towards a market economy, and since 1979 lifted 300 million people out of poverty and created this middle class that is growing. That's what would make Iran a great power, in my view, not just thumping their chests and saying we ought to be considered a great power.
Thank you for all of these wonderful comments. I'm amazed to hear about how pro-American these young people are, and I would like to see that continue. I guess my follow-up that I haven't really heard from anything so far is how does this generation feel about their neighbors, the countries that are closest to them, because I know that dictates a lot about how a country moves forward in various areas. We're watching these missile, things going off, and we in America are hearing so much about the impact that has in Iran's relationships with its neighbors, especially Israel. But how do all these young people who are disenchanted and disillusioned feel about all of this that's going on?
That's a very important question. Let's just go to Israel first. Again, here's another example of, I think this is, born from my conversations with thousands of Iranians across 20 cities and villages, and I think it'll be corroborated from others who've gone to Iran, is that the Israel issue is not a particularly popular one in Iran, in the sense that bashing Israel is not particularly popular on the quote-unquote Iranian street, the way it is on the Egyptian street, or the Jordanian street, or the Saudi street. And in fact, those of us who've covered disasters in Iran, earthquakes and other such events, when you go there, often the first thing that people will say to you is there's a certain amount of resentment. They will say, no, the government isn't doing anything for us. They're not helping us. But if this earthquake took place in South Lebanon, or if it took place in Palestine, the government would be sending millions and millions of dollars. There's actually a built-up resentment over the government support, for Hamas, for Hezbollah. Now, when you look at the numbers, for example, the amount that the Iranian government offers in aid to Hamas or Hezbollah is very small compared to the amount of money that's coming in every day as a result of the high oil price. However, psychologically, that bothers many Iranians, particularly those who are suffering economically. And so I find that the issue of Palestine is not as popular an issue in Iran as it is elsewhere in the region. So when Mahmoud Ahmadinejad makes these grand speeches, makes these defiant statements, I often argue he's not speaking to the Iranian street. He's speaking to the Arab street and to the larger Muslim street, because that street loves it. That street loves this kind of rhetoric, and it also loves it in a sense because, and Ahmadinejad, by the way, is probably more popular in Cairo and Amman than he is in Tehran. And I see this when I travel to those places, and interestingly, when I tell taxi drivers in Cairo that I'm from Iran, it's a good way for me to get a free taxi ride, because they're very happy that someone from Iran is here, and especially if he says something good about Ahmadinejad and I agree with him, and then he'll certainly give me the free taxi ride. But there is a great, he's reaching out to that street, because again, this goes back to the issue of, do you want to be a country or a cause? If you're a cause, you really get excited by mobilizing the masses. Iran and Egypt were estranged diplomatically for many years because Iran, in the aftermath of the revolution, they named a very prominent thoroughfare Khalid Islambuli Avenue. Well, Khalid Islambuli was the assassin of Anwar Sadat. And for many years, Iran and Egypt did not have relations because Egypt said, we cannot have relations with a country that names a street after the man who assassinated. Well, Iran had kind of backed itself into a corner. When Iran had gradually started to mellow in the 1990s, but even the pragmatic forces in Iran couldn't change that. Eventually, they managed to change it, and that was one example of Iran acting like a country more than a cause, and Iran and Egypt's relations have improved as a result. So that's Israel. On Iraq, it is important to note that Iran did fight a very devastating 8-year war with Iraq. I think again, Iran was probably one of the few countries that was pleased to see Saddam Hussein go, was pleased to see, frankly, Saddam Hussein executed. Iranians remembered the missiles that fell on. But one thing that I found interesting is that in talking to Iranians today is they do have a great deal of sympathy for Iraqis and what they're going through today. And there is Iranian television has been very clever about showing carnage in Iraq on a daily basis, and lest Iranians think that one way that they might be liberated would be through the United States, and this is what you get through U.S. liberation, is what the Iranian television is saying. And the last point is Dubai. Dubai has become very interesting because Dubai is this small city-state at in the Persian Gulf, part of the United Arab Emirates, but in many ways it has become the commercial lungs of Iran. There's a great deal of Iranian business taking place in Dubai, but also it has become part of sort of the mythology of young Iranians, who are looking for a place to go on their honeymoon, going a place of vacation. During the Nowruz holidays, the Iranian Persian New Year holidays, about 200,000 to 300,000 Iranians turn up in Dubai. Pop singers from Los Angeles, which there's such a large Iranian community in Los Angeles that they call it Tehrangeles. So pop singers from Tehrangeles fly to Dubai. They give concerts in Dubai for Iranians because they're not allowed to give those concerts in Iran. And so Dubai has not only become kind of commercial lungs of Iran, but has also become kind of a social outlet for many Iranians, a place that's close enough to home that they can go to, and most importantly, a place that they can get a visa to, because it's very difficult for Iranians to get visas, anywhere else other than Dubai or Turkey as vacation spots. So that's why it has become a very important neighbor to Iran.
Thank you. I'm sitting here thinking about what I saw yesterday when we saw the children, the Iranian Revolution exhibit, and how young that man was that took the pictures and whatnot. And you were talking about pop culture. And I was just trying to think of the point of view from my kids and what they'd be asking. And I think one of the questions they want to know is what, and not like some of the Iranian people that I met here to this conference, but what is the average kid in Iran or young person that can't travel to America.
Right.
You know, because he talked yesterday a lot about, you know, they take certain elements of our culture and,
Right.
and this is what they like and this is what they don't like. But for those people that can't go outside Iran,
Mm-hmm.
similar to some of my kids that
Mhm.
don't go outside their neighborhoods,
Mhm.
how do they view Americans, like the average American,
Mhm.
and what do they like about the average
Mhm.
American, what do they dislike, and how accurate is their information that they receive?
Right. No, it's an important question, particularly on the issue of accuracy. There is an almost among the young people. There's this almost myth of America that particularly on this notion of U.S.-Iran relations, that if the United States and Iran were to engage in relations, it would be kind of the panacea to cure all of our woes and all of our economic ills and everything, and dollars would be falling from trees, etc., which is obviously not true. But that's one issue. And the second issue is, how do they embrace, American pop culture? Well, there's, several different ways. Iran is a fairly wired country. Persian is the fourth most commonly used language in the blogosphere. And you find internet cafes, all across Iran, and young Iranians are, engaged in blogging, engaged in looking at, sites on the internet, etc. And one of the things I did when I was reporting from Iran is I got to know an owner of an internet cafe in which a lot of young people would go to. I asked him to do some spying for me. Essentially I asked him, if we could look at kind of the history of, visited websites, and the kind of things that we were seeing were skateboarding sites. We were seeing Timberland shoes. We saw, a Britney Spears fan club, a site that was hit, several times. And then the other interesting things that happens is that there are one of these interesting quirks of globalization and pop culture and the way it finds its way to different countries. There's a musical artist by the name of Chris de Burgh, who did the song Lady in Red, but he, and other than Lady in Red, I mean, I don't know anything that Chris de Burgh has done, but he's one of the most popular singers in Iran. When I first landed in Iran, people would say to me, so, you must like Chris de Burgh, and I said, who? And interestingly, he recently went to Iran because it's one of the few places that he has such a huge fan base, and he was really received very well in Iran, and people, and so that's kind of an interesting turn as well. But again, I go back to this issue of normalcy, because I found that many of the young Iranians that I spoke to, one of the things that they think when they think about America is that young Americans, they have normal lives. They don't have to worry about are they going to get into trouble for going to this party? Are they going to, they have a decent chance of getting into a college. They don't have all of this, pressure on them, when they're taking this concours exam. But they also have this myth of life in America. And Iranians whom I know who've managed to get green cards or managed to get visas, who've come to America, they said to me, man, you really have to work hard in America. It's not, as easy as we thought it was. And so it's a combination of myths and embracing of American pop culture, and even, odd embrace of people like Chris de Burgh. Yeah, you will.
I'm wondering to what extent maybe Iranian youth are looking away from America for sort of their view in the future, say to China or India or other places in terms of culture or setting the tone of what the future is going to be.
Sure. Sure. When it comes to China and India, I find that Iranian government is very much looking to China. In fact, there was, but I'll get to the youth in a second. But in fact, there's a debate within Iranian government about, we ought to perhaps embrace the quote-unquote China model, is what they describe it as. And not only Iranian government, but several sort of authoritarian governments in the region like the China model, because they feel it's a way to grow their economy, a way to develop, while maintaining control of the commanding heights of the political space, the way China has managed to do it. I think many Iranians would actually not mind that, frankly, because at least it would mean the economy is growing. At least it would mean the charts are moving up and to the right rather than down and to the left the way they are in Iran right now. When it comes to youth, I think the lodestars remain Europe and the United States. They are not China and India, and they're not looking eastward. Some of this has to do with Persian chauvinism, which is, I don't know if something you've gotten into at all, but there is a certain amount of Persian cultural chauvinism towards their Arab and Asian neighbors. This goes back deeply to Iranian history, this notion of Iranian exceptionalism, that we are a place of 3,000 years of rich historical civilization. What can we learn from our Arab neighbors, our Asian neighbors? And some of this has to do with the fact that in the 19th and 20th century, Iranian intellectuals always viewed Europe as the lodestar, as the aspirational point, not any of the Asian countries. And then when it comes to Babak had mentioned that, to me just now, that it might be useful to talk about youth views on American foreign policy and Iranian general views on American foreign policy. It seems to me that in the there is in much the same way that you find a certain sense of disillusion and nihilism among many Iranians who are just sort of saying, well, it's time that we shouldn't even vote anymore, because after all, what does voting get us? Our candidates are disqualified. There seems to be a nihilism and disillusion setting in about what America can really do for Iran anyway. There was admittedly a certain amount of excitement when President Bush started saying we stand for the Iranian people, etc. There was resentment when he called Iran an axis of evil country. There is a joke in Iran that President Bush must be tired, because he keeps standing for the Iranian people and not doing much. But Iranians are really caught in a bind, because on the one hand, there's very little appetite the Iranians have for the possibility of a U.S. military action against Iran. You will find a few people in Iran who will say, why don't the Americans come and liberate us? It's a minority view, and the vast majority of Iranians know the pain of war. They see the pain of war in Iraq. They don't want that either. So what I think they really do want is this notion of, we go back to the poll, the 2002 poll. We go back to this myth of Iran-U.S. relations. I think they want a normalcy in the relationship, and they think that normalcy in the relationship will accrue to them some economic benefits, will accrue to them kind of the normalcy that they want in the world that they don't have right now.
I teach a class that includes Iran as one of 6 countries, and we do a lot of comparisons. And part of what we see is the role of the Supreme Leader and the Guardian Council. And if you look at the structures of these respective countries, you look at the constitutions, it strikes our students that they need an internal form, a constitutional amendment. They need something that, in a sense, democratizes that whole idea that candidates are vetted as eliminated. Is that likely?
No. The reason I say no, your students are absolutely right, and I applaud them for their incisiveness, and I think it's great that you're getting very deep into it with them. And the reason I say no is because well, let's say no as long as the current Supreme Leader is alive. The current Supreme Leader, Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, has shown himself to be a master divide and rule type type ruler. He's also shown himself to be notoriously indecisive, but he's also shown himself to, he allows the factions to fight each other in a way that therefore then he can step in at the last moment and make the ultimate, decisions. He tends to lean towards the more conservative, the more hardline, but he does have advisors around him who are in the quote-unquote pragmatic conservative camp. And so, if you figure a guy like Ayatollah Khamenei, who was elevated to this very important post without the religious credentials that come with this very important post, there's a certain insecurity in the man. And there's a certain insecurity in the way he looks at his position. And therefore, what he's managed to do is expand this position of the supreme leader. The supreme leader's office has anywhere from 300 to 500 people on its staff. The supreme leader is by far the most important and most powerful position in the Iranian bureaucracy today, as you know and as your students know. And one of the things that's interesting is Ahmadinejad gets the headlines, but Khamenei makes the real decisions. Now, this point, but Ahmadinejad is not inconsequential, and Ahmadinejad has the spoiler power. And let me just give you, an insider's example that just came to me recently at a conference I attended in Egypt. An Iranian insider told me this story. One of Khamenei's advisors received a letter, actually Khamenei received a letter from French President Sarkozy, and I'm probably breaking news with this and with CNN here, but we'll keep this one, on background. Sarkozy sent a letter to Khamenei, according to this advisor, saying that, I'm willing to back you, I'm willing to engage with you and support you as long as Khamenei makes a pledge that Iran is not pursuing nuclear weapons. Khamenei thought this was a serious enough letter from a serious enough person that he would pursue it, so he sent his advisor to Paris to discuss it with him. Khamenei told the advisor, it's better if you tell Ahmadinejad that you're doing this as a matter of courtesy. So Ahmadinejad told this advisor, okay, be at my office at midnight, which is insulting in and of itself. And then when he showed up there at midnight, again, who knows whether you can verify all these details. It came from a pretty good source. Ahmadinejad made him wait for a couple of hours. And then he goes to Paris. Ahmadinejad said, fine, go ahead, do what you have to do. He goes to Paris. He arrives there. Sarkozy looks at this advisor and says, what kind of game are you playing? And the advisor says, what do you mean? He says, and he shows him a letter. And he had received a letter from Ahmadinejad, essentially a private letter from Ahmadinejad, somewhat insulting to Sarkozy, saying you are still a young man in politics, you don't understand these issues. And essentially he undermined this initiative. And so this is the way Iranian politics actually can work. Because when you have a supreme leader, Ayatollah Khamenei, who is relatively indecisive, who lets the factions play themselves out, who does not, punch the table when the president does something like this, then you have this chaos that reigns in Iranian foreign policy. There was a very good column in today's Washington Post by David Ignatius in which he described Iranian's foreign policy as, and this issue particularly of negotiations as a definite maybe, and so this is, to some extent the way things are, and we have to essentially accept a certain amount of chaos in Iranian foreign policy making.
We unfortunately are out of time, so please save your questions. We'll have many other speakers so that hopefully we'll be able to address any questions you have. I think this has been an excellent way to begin our day, and I would again like to thank you so much for joining us.
I'll give you my, because I just gave out my last cards. I'm coming off of 3 conferences. Yeah. I do, yeah. Mostly, you know what I do now? It's mostly I talk about the Persian Gulf region, Dubai, Saudi